What is up everyone, Jeran here, hoping you're safe and great. For this video, magre-react tayo with the world's first breathing PC. So this was posted by DIY Perks and I find it interesting since, well, it's an enthusiast PC in terms of its innovation, no? Makikita natin mamaya bakit siya tinawag na world's first breathing PC. So let's start the video.
This is my homemade bellows system with a rather modern twist, and I built it a while ago as an experimental method of moving.
So first impressions, no, as we can see, nakikita natin yung mga vents on this side and then on the other side para I think ma-push yung air, and then you have a moving mechanism at the middle. That's parang pressurized. Nakikita natin dito nag-extend siya hanggang dun sa top para ma-push natin yung pressure ng air kung saang direction man natin gusto, no? Ayan, so I've had this experiment before about vacuums, how to compress or pressurize air para kung saan mo siya gustong papuntahin, dun siya dadaan. I'm not sure lang kung anong ginamit niya dito, no, dun sa moving mechanism at the middle. Kung ano yung ginamit niya. So let's watch.
Air without using fans, and remarkably it works fantastically well, able to shift its entire internal volume every second while barely making.
Oh, I see. Parang nakikita ko na dito, no, meron siyang fluid doon sa loob ng mga tubes, and of course meron siyang parang wheels na may I think this is rubberized para hindi magasgas yung glass. Sige, continue natin.
Making any noise at all and being extremely cool to watch. However, it was always intended to be more than just a novelty. So, in this video, I'm going to be putting it to good use by building it into what it was always designed for, a high-power PC. This video is sponsored by KiwiCo. More about them later. Before I get going, a quick recap is in order of how this unique air movement system actually works, as it's fascinating and it all hinges around the biggest challenge in making it, which was to get the mover to go.
Okay, so na-observe ko lang, no, at the middle of the mechanism, parang may mga magnets. Para siyang magnets, no? I'm not sure lang, pero it looks like magnets at the middle, so
go back and forth quietly, as using a motor and pulley system was out of the question due to the noise that it would generate. My first attempts were to make a silent linear motor with some magnets in a tube and some wire coils. While this did work to some extent, it wasn't particularly successful, with the movement being juddery and weak. However, observing how well the magnets fitted into the tube inspired me to what would ultimately be the system by which it works, which is to move a single magnet in the tube back and forth using.
So tama yun, no? Observe natin kanina na it's magnet, no? Kasi ano ba ang maganda kasi sa magnet, no? Kahit meron siyang extra layer on top of it, in the middle of kung ano yung na-attract niya, kahit meron siyang extra layer, depending on the force o yung lakas ng magnetism ng magnet, it can still work. So tumatagos yung power niya or yung magnetism niya kahit may extra layer on top of it. So I think that's a nice touch. So ayan, sige, go.
In water. Getting the flow to instantly reverse to make the magnet go back and forth, though, was a real challenge, and my first attempt involved making a set of homemade solenoid valves with a focus on silent operation with no loud click. They worked by using some of the magnets to direct the flow of water, and at first it looked pretty promising, as the magnet could be made to go back and forth with the flick of a switch. And encouraged, I proceeded with making the main enclosure for it, which was simply made out of painted MDF with some nice glass panels. The mover itself, however, was made out of 2 sheets of acrylic that were sandwiched together for rigidity, with a set of bearings at each end to move it smoothly along a set of glass rods. A ring of magnets in this mover's centre initially repelled the magnet in the tube until it was forced within their magnetic field, at which point it snapped into position and was held there very.
Okay, so another observation, no? He used acrylic instead of tempered glass. I think kasi when tempered glass, kagaya nito, nakikita natin dito. Pag untempered glass is binutas mo, nagkakaroon siya ng cracks all throughout, and the way tempered glass works kasi is it's very very, kumbaga yung molecules or yung part, yung sige tawagin na natin molecules. Yung molecules niya is sobrang compact, sobrang solid together na pag may nabasag or may na-penetrate lang na isang part, it will crack the whole glass. That's why siguro acrylic glass yung ginamit niya. Acrylic yung ginamit niya dito na material is para hindi siya gaanong mag-crack the whole way. So kasi mas flexible ang acrylic when it comes to these projects pag bubutasan mo siya. So nakikita natin may mga konting cracks dito, no? Pero I think it won't affect as much yung air pressure nung system mamaya.
Securely, locking them together without actually touching. Unfortunately though, while the direction reversed nicely thanks to some reed switches triggering a relay, it overall didn't work very well at all, with the motion being very weak and slow. This was down to the valves simply not being strong enough to overcome the flow of water, so it was time for a rethink, and essentially the project was rescued by these cheap little water pumps. You see, unlike many pumps, these having no internal circuitry results in them instantly starting and stopping when provided with power. So after stringing a set of them together with half orientated to pump in one direction and the others orientated to pump in the other direction, things were finally looking up as they could instantly jet water out with a significant amount of power thanks to them all working together. So once it was all plumbed up, it was time for the grand test. And yes, I was pretty excited to see it working at last.
Yes! Yes! Look at that! Look at that!
So what's remarkable about this system is how silent it is during use and how quickly the mover changes in direction.
Yes, also kung building on what he's saying, yung compared kasi dun sa mga nauna niyang models, mas constant or mas merong constant speed yung pag-move nitong mechanism. So yun kasi yung key in terms of cooling a computer or a PC. Dapat constant, or if not constant, it's either lumalakas siya during siguro stress test. Pag nagagamit siya, pag umiinit na yung system, mas lumalakas, mas bumibilis yung fan speed. Pero yung paggamit niya dito, since it's compressed air or pressurized air, dapat constant yung speed niya para ma-maintain niya yung temperature inside the PC. Kasi if not, pag erratic yung movement or hindi pantay yung speed niya, kung going to the right mabagal, tapos going to the left mabilis, wala ding kwenta kasi mabilis stuck or mabilis mag ipon yung hot air or yung hot air inside the PC. Ganun kabilis, kaya lagi dapat constant na may umiikot or laging constant na may airflow.
This rapid change in direction is thanks to some magnets being positioned at the ends of the tube that actually oppose the mover, so it already begins to slow down before the water flow is reversed. When the flow is triggered to go the other way, its inertia is almost completely preserved as it just gets bounced back, following the magnet in the tube. As everything is magnetically coupled, it all operates smoothly with plenty of shock absorption, which is amazing to watch. So, a fascinating device to be sure, but using it to cool a PC does have its own challenges, notably that getting a continual and consistent flow of air out of it is going to be a bit tricky. You see, as it stands, air is pulled in from one side at a time and pushed out of the same side it came from. This would still cool something like a heatsink placed in the path of this airflow, but it would repeatedly pull hot air back in, harming the cooling efficiency. So, some kind of air valve chamber is required.
Yun, another direction, no? Maganda yung naisip niyang notion dito kasi kasi meron tayong tinatawag na intake and exhaust when it comes to PC cooling. So, intake is yung fans natin from the outside is kumukuha siya ng air from the outside, and then yung mga, let's say for example, itong nasa harapan, that's the front of the case, or front of the case, and then this other side would be the back of the case, yung rear ng case. Usually ang formation ng mga fans natin is intake yung nasa harapan and exhaust yung sa labas. Exhaust, since dumaan na yung air dito at the front, dadaan siya sa mga components to cool it, and then after cooling it, syempre mainit na yung air, so kailangan na yung ilabas. So meron tayong exhaust at the back of the case para ilabas natin yung air. So yun yung nakikita niyang challenge, no, with this one, since tama nga naman kasi when you're pushing air at the other side, babalik yung air if bumalik din yung mechanism. So babalik yung hot air inside. So I think yun yung sinosolve niya ngayon at the moment.
In keeping with the rest of the design, I've made the panels for this again out of MDF, giving them a nice coat of paint for appearance, with some ash veneer finishing off the edges nicely. My plan here is for these valves to operate passively, with only air pressure opening and closing them. So, to make sure that they close softly, I'm gluing some soft string around each opening, which will also help to make a nice seal once they're closed. I've chosen foam board for the valves themselves, as it's very lightweight and somewhat rigid, with some little pins being used for the hinges so that they can open and close without much resistance at all. So, with the chamber now screwed together, you can see that if the air were to be pushed in through one side, it would push against the opposite valves, keeping them closed, with the only way of escape being through the opening in the top.
Yun, so nasolve niya na, no, when it comes to that problem kanina. So, pag inopen, pag nag-i-intake siya ng air, the right side would open, since yung pressure ng air is may hinihigop siya, so bubukas, and then the other side will still be closed since yung pressure ng air is pushing it outside, pero ang in niya kasi, ang paano siya bumukas is going in. So that's nice, no, na naka-cancel out yung air para hindi ma-prevent nating magbukas tong kabila, and isa lang yung lalabasan ng air, which is yung sinasabi niya yung nasa top.
So in theory, this should work, and as there's so much empty space inside here, it's perfect for housing all of the PC components as well. To really test out the cooling ability of the bellows system, I'm using top-of-the-line components here, with the rig being based around the very powerful AMD 5950X and a Zotac RTX 3080. At the time of making this video, graphics cards are in short supply, so a big shout out to Zotac for sending this over for the build. So that it can be cooled by the bellows though, rather than its original heatsink, I'm going to replace it with a water block, and you'll see why this is important in just a moment.
No, so pinalitan niya yung nilipat niya yung PCB ng graphics card into a water block. I think meron siyang gagawin mamaya about water cooling. Pero I think for a system like this na pressurize yung air, hindi mo na kailangan ng fans. So kaya niya siguro tinanggal yung sa graphics card. Kasi if merong fans yan, So, yung pressurized air mo, magka-cancel out lang. Technically, walang kwenta yung fans mo sa graphics card or dun sa video card mo kung meron ka ng pressurized air.
Crucial 2 have sent over one of their new 64GB RAM kits which clock out at an impressive 3600 MHz, perfect for a maxed out AMD-based build.
Also,
Now to keep
ang ginamit niya dito is an ITX. So, ITX form factor, maliit lang. Yan yung smallest type of motherboard or system. Siguro to maximize yung space niya since I think maliit lang yung ginamit niyang case. Maliit lang yung gagawin niyang case for this pressurized. It's more on, nakafocus siya on performance, no? So, 64GB, Ryzen 9, 5900. So, it's a powerful system. Tignan natin kung masusustain na yung temperature nito. Medyo mainit to kung sinamahan mo pa ng 3080. Yeah, it's very, very hot.
keep the processor cool as well, I'm using an AlphaCool iSpare Solo CPU block, which amazingly has both a pump and reservoir built into it, making the whole water loop much simpler to put together, as you'll see in a moment. For the mounting system, I'm using some aluminium right-angle lengths, and as these are going to be seen, it makes sense to give them a polish. Believe it or not, this is the first time I've actually used polish on aluminium in a build, and I'm impressed with how nice it looks. Ideas are flow. These rails are intended to be mounted onto the chamber's top panel, helped along by another piece to hold the graphics card nice and securely. The large gap here has been left for the system's radiator, which is super easy to plumb up thanks to the iSpare Solo taking care of so much of what makes a water loop complicated, and once filled up it's essentially complete with just 3 pipes required. Easy. After adding 2 sheets of acrylic glass to the chamber, the system can be lowered in place, with a passive PSU being added to the bottom to power it all. So, as you can see, they aesthetically match each other really rather nicely, which is great. However, they do need to be interfaced together for the air valve system to work properly, and that's why I've made these really rather large panels. It's going to be big. The cutouts in these panels offer each of the modules to be slotted into place, using some brackets to secure them down. The bellows themselves, though, are extremely tricky to get into position. And I don't know how it happened, but disaster! The acrylic tube for the magnet has shattered. And it's not as simple as just buying it.
So, ito na, no? Lumabas na din yung problem with acrylic. It might be mas flexible with tempered glass, pero with that flexibility comes mas weaker yung durability ng acrylic glass. Ang acrylic glass compared to tempered glass is mas mabilis siyang magasgasan, mas mabilis siyang madurog kasi mas malambot siya, mas weak. So, yung molecules niya, tawagin na molecules, is hindi ganun ka-compact. So, tingnan natin kung paano niya susolusyonan to.
A new one. You see, the magnet fitted inside this tube miraculously well, almost as if it were machined to fit by someone with a lot of skill. This fit was so precise that the magnet could just drop through with absolutely no resistance. Yet when one end was blocked with my finger, it made the drop incredibly slow due to the air taking a while to squeeze around the magnet itself to reach the other side. The precision here is about 0.01 of a millimeter, which is why it could literally bounce on a cushion of air. In an attempt to find a replacement, I've bought over 40 different tubes from various manufacturers, but not a single one of them is going to be suitable, as they're either too small for the magnet to even fit into at all, or too large, resulting in a fit that's so loose that the magnet just drops through with no cushioning, even when both ends are blocked. A loose fit like this would mean that the bellows would operate extremely weakly, if at all, so things aren't looking good, and it shows how remarkable it was that the original tube, the first and only one I bought unseen online, worked so well with the magnets I had, and ultimately resulted in the inspiration for the entire build. A coincidence? You decide. However, there is still hope. You see, the magnets themselves are nickel coated, which has given me an idea. For this, I'm going to need a jar full of white vinegar, into which I'm going to dip a strip of pure nickel on one side and a few bunched together on the other. And my hope is to fine-tune it to match one of the new rods. So after a few hours, it's gone a frosted silver colour, partly I think due to an acid wash that I gave it earlier to make sure that it was clean enough to plate. No matter though, after a quick polish, it's as good as new, and looks, at first glance, identical to how it was before. Giving it a measure though, we can see that it's been built up by 0.4 of a millimetre, and testing it with one of the tubes that was initially too large for it, we can observe that it now fits well enough to gain some of the cushioning effect that the original setup had. And after putting the bellows system back together with the new tube and magnet, it does indeed work again, which is a huge relief. So after fitting it to the frame, more carefully this time, you can see that there's one last piece to the puzzle: the side intake vents. These again are made out of MDF, though I've rounded the external side of the vent holes with my router to make them look a bit nicer. And after the usual trim-up process, including some additional foam buffers for silence, they can be screwed in place along with a top panel to cover the radiator. And with that, the world's first...
Ayun, so balik lang natin ng konti. Okay, so yun yung worry ko kanina, na exposed yung radiator at the back. Hindi hindi naman siya ganun ka-major in terms of placement. It will still work, no? Pero ang worry ko lang is yung dust build up kasi mas mabilis when it's not covered or when it's not around something na magpo-protect sa dust. Kasi pag nag-build up yung dust with that, syempre masihina yung pag-absorb ng heat or yung pag-dissipate ng heat. So mainit pa din yung system mo. So yun.
For the radiator. And with that, the world's first breathing PC is complete. So with it finally together, it's looking absolutely ginormous. But thanks to the glass, it doesn't actually feel too heavy in the room because it's somewhat transparent. Anyway, it's going to be really interesting to see whether the bellows are going to be powerful enough to push the air through the vents and cool down the system.
Okay, so kita natin, no, laki ng ano. So it's nice na ginamit niya is ITX kasi malaki na yung pang-pressure niya ng air, yung pang-airflow niya dun sa baba. And it's nice looking, first of all. And it looks like a showpiece. Pag nilagay mo to sa PC convention, pag-uusapan to. Dudumugin to.
But before we try that out and test all sorts of things like thermals, it's time for a quick ad from this video's sponsor. Okay, so it's now time for the grand switch on. And for those wondering, everything is plugged in through a little port on the back here. And I earlier threaded the necessary cables underneath the radiator and then out through this hole, sealing it with a bit of foam. Right, so are you guys ready? Got a power button just here, so let's see if it works. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's nice na nakikita na natin yung pag-compress ng air at the top. And yung hindi natin nakikita yung air mismo, pero it's going up, no? Since yung pressure nung pump, yung pressurized air niya is isa lang yung pwedeng labasan at the top lang. So it's nice, no? May RGB lighting din siya doon sa pump niya ng graphics card. It looks nice.
With the bellows activated by the system, the vents do appear to be opening and closing exactly as I hoped they would, with a rhythmic motion that looks very futuristic, almost like alien technology from a sci-fi film. The way the vents are configured allows for a continual flow of air over the components, where it then goes through the radiator into which all of the system's heat is dumped and then in turn kept cool by the passing air.
Okay, so yun na nga yung na-mention natin kanina. na-mention niya din, no, na merong constant airflow para hindi, let's say, hindi naiipon yung hot air inside nung case niya dito, no. So, kasi pag naipon yan, again, yung pressure mo inside, pag naipon yung hot air dyan inside and walang constant na airflow, mainit pa din. So, walang kwenta yung project niya in terms of airflow kung ganun yung nangyari, kung hindi niya na-solve yun.
There is a small drop in this flow whenever the mover changes in direction, but for something that works passively, it does appear to function surprisingly well.
Yan. So, nakikita natin, no, merong mga downtimes pero hindi ganun katagal. So, meron pa rin constant na airflow while we are moving the air. So, nakikita natin, no, yung pag-akyat at baba nung paper. So, may constant airflow pa rin siya at the minimal, kahit at the least.
So all this looks extremely promising and is very cool to watch. But does it actually keep the system cool? Well, it's time to do some tests. Now I've got my monitor here and I'm just going to plug it in with the cables I've already prepared. So the first thing I'm going to do is slam it with Prime 95, which should stress the CPU, which is again a 5950X, to its absolute limit and generate a lot of heat. So let's see how this goes. Right, so it's been running for a while now, and I think the maximum temperature has been reached as it is sticking at 60 degrees Celsius. That's pretty good, especially considering this is a 16-core processor, so I'm very impressed so far. But what about the graphics card? Now, it's worth noting that graphics...
So, for a Ryzen 9 with 60 degrees Celsius, it's working, but I'm not sure. I don't think he is stress testing, pero for idle, I think that's a good 60 degrees Celsius is it's a nice temperature. Kasi yung sa akin, Ryzen 5 3600 XT nasa around 50 on idle, 40 to 50 on idle, 40 to 50 degrees Celsius on idle, and I'm using an AIO. So with this one, I think it's acceptable yung 60 degrees Celsius on idle. I think naka-idle lang siya, no.
Cards can generate a lot more heat than a CPU can, so this is going to be interesting. Amazingly, the temperatures from the graphics card are equally as impressive, with it topping out at a maximum of 62 degrees Celsius.
Okay, so nag-i-stress test na siya, nagbe-benchmarking na siya. So meron tayong 61 degrees Celsius, which is very, very nice in terms of GPU, kasi ang GPU can usually pag AAA games like Cyberpunk or pag ini-stress test mo ng ganito, umaabot yan ng 80. And that's very, very high. Air na yun, air cooling na yun. So, triple air cooling na yun. So, this is very impressive in terms of yung kanyang temperatures,
which it appears to remain at no matter what kind of load is thrown at the system. For such powerful components, these results are fantastic and definitely a step up from what you could normally expect from a single radiator water cooling loop, despite my previous tests indicating that it was only about on par with 4 large fans. I think that this is because in practice, the bellows system is able to push the air through the radiator fins more effectively than fans mounted directly to it could ever hope to. And yet, because there are some losses in the system from slight inefficiencies in the air valves, there's plenty of room for improvement from this initial prototype.
Yes, marami pang pwedeng improve yung cooling nito, no? Since nakita natin may mga konting downtime yung air when pushing yung hot air outside through the radiator, no? It can still be cooler. So, madaming possibilities ng breathing PC na to using an air pressure, no? So, it's very nice in the community.
As for the sound profile, the bellows on their own aren't too distracting, but the air vents do thump a little, which I'd like to further reduce by replacing the foam pads with small opposing magnets instead to make them completely silent. Even so though, it's a pretty relaxing sound and has a peaceful quality to it.
So that's nice, no? Very, very silent. Siguro I think this one of the perks or one of the advantages of using pressurized air. It's very, very quiet since it's just pushing. Unang-una, nasa sound dampen na kasi inside kasi naka-enclose siya and naka-pressurize. Kumbaga, yung vibrations ng sound is naka-compress lang dun sa loob. So, nadadampen na dun pa lang sa loob yung sound. So, ang maririnig mo na lang dyan most probably is the air going outside the radiator. Pero that's very, very minimal in my experience. Right, diba?
So I think those performance results are actually quite good considering this is basically a fan replacement, and I know that it's huge and not at all practical, but it is a new type of cooling system and it works. So I think that that's mission accomplished. It's just fascinating to watch all the vents in action as well as the bellows going back and forth. It just seems organic, and there are some variations as well that are random in its function that just make it feel kind of alive, which is quite weird. Yeah, so it's not super practical or anything, but it definitely does what I set out to, which was just to make something really unique. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video and
Yun, so that was it. Again, sabi niya, it's not very practical, no? Mahirap siyang gawin. Madaming gastos. Pero, moving on in the future, madadagdagan na yung type of cooling natin. Kasi right now, we have air cooling, we have liquid, yung AIO, liquid, pero that still uses fan, no? And we have the water cooling. So, well, in the future, meron na tayong pressurized air. So, which is nice. Pero, I think, pag nakita to ng mga case manufacturers or yung PC manufacturers, they will create something like this in a more compact and mas budget efficient na build. So, it's very, very nice to have these. So, this was the world's first breathing PC by DIY Perks. So that was my take on it. So very, very impressive, no? Madami pa tayong discover in the future in terms of PC building. Alright, so that was it for my reaction video. If you like this video, just click on that like button down below and subscribe to my channel for more tech stuff and videos like this. And guys, I'll see you on the next one.